Okay, so you guys should have gotten an email covering chapter 16 and 17 where it would be uploaded on your Google Drive, I believe. Some of you guys are wondering why we're continuing on. Main reason, I need to finish the book to feel like we've accomplished a lot this year. Also, I still have to give you guys grades. For you guys that are planning on taking the AP Psychology exam from the AP College Board, on Thursday, I'm going to have an email that I'm going to try to send to all of the people that are planning on taking the AP exam, so we can kind of talk about that. But also on Thursday, for you guys as a whole, you will be taking your chapters 13 and 14 test. I think I'm going to combine them because I think it's what I did on the notes. So you guys will be doing that over the weekend. So lots of stuff going on, but we are going to continue on. For you guys taking the AP Psychology exam, most, if not all of this stuff will not be on there. And hopefully you guys got the announcement from the school that we're not doing exams, but we will still be finishing the chapters. And that's why you guys have chapter 16 terms that will be assigned and due on Monday. So this is kind of a cool section, though, which is kind of I wish we were together so I could talk to you guys about this and kind of have some of our cool questions and discussions on this stuff. But we'll see what we can do and make the best of this. So chapter 16 and 17 actually deal with abnormal behavior slash psychology, and sometimes it's called psychopathology. Now, some terms that we're going to be using in defining abnormal psychology would be this: it's the scientific investigation of the cause or etiology the diagnosis, meaning kind of figuring out what's going on, and then the treatment of mental illnesses. And other definitions that they would actually use for abnormal behavior, and they would say that abnormality is something that is rare and is something unusual. It's not something that's common. So we would say like the general population of America would not have the issue that the person could be dealing with. And so in theory, another definition that they could use for abnormal psychology would be this: the disturbances, like a disturbance or a disruption in cognition, meaning the person's thinking, behavior, how they act, and emotions, like their anger or their fear or their hatred, that are deviant, that are dysfunctional, that are distressing, and potentially dangerous. So we're going to go through these 4 Ds that would possibly help us describe and understand abnormal psychology. If a person is deviant, we kind of think of somebody that's kind of devilish, somebody who is like a little bit schemy, somebody that is likes to cause trouble, thinks it's funny. And so they would say that a person that has abnormal behavior could be considered deviant, meaning they have thoughts or actions that differ from normal behavior. So everybody's in the class, everybody's having a good time, the teacher is, lecturing, and kids are learning, and everybody's just having fun. And all of a sudden, one kid stands up and decides to just throw his books across the room just because he feels like doing it. And so what would happen is you're just like, okay, it's an action that's different from normal behavior. Maybe a person just blurts out something that is inappropriate. That would be considered deviant. But when we think of deviant, I don't necessarily always think of something like too off the wall. I just think of some kid who likes to cause trouble here and there, deviant behavior. And I guess if you were kind of like, I don't even want to go down that road, because I was going to say you could maybe rank these, but they wouldn't do that. So let's just ignore what I just said. Letter B, dysfunctional. These are actions that prevent individuals from caring for themselves, meeting obligations, and being productive. Meaning the person, if you are dysfunctional, you can't care for yourself. Meaning you can't maybe take care of yourself as far as job, as far as eating, as far as clothing, taking medicine, those type of things. You couldn't meet obligations as far as like you have to be to work on time. You have to be able to be kind to people at work. You have to be able to finish your job and get things done that way. And then also prevents them from being productive. Productive maybe in the job world, maybe in their relationship world, being productive, maybe in a person that would be a good citizen. That would be kind of what that would be considered as well. Distressful, thoughts and behaviors that are upsetting to an individual. meaning you as an individual have thoughts, cognitions, behaviors that just are not good behaviors. They're upsetting to you. Maybe you feel like, I want to kill this person. I want to go after them. And it's only considered abnormal if they are excessive, meaning over the top, constant, meaning happening a lot, and long lasting. It's not just a brief thought. And that would be like, it upsets the individual. Maybe you think like, you know what, I could starve myself, or I could just walk out on my family. That would be distressful. It doesn't always have to be violence. I think a lot of times in this discussion we go to violence, but it doesn't have to be that. It could be the fact that you're abnormal, you're acting something different, that you're just like, man, I would never lash out and yell at my kids that way. That would be distressful. And then another part of abnormality would be dangerous. Suicidal behaviors that could be part of this. It could be persistent starvation, meaning like you're just trying to starve yourself and not eat. And other behaviors that would be considered dangerous to the person and those around them. This would be the point where you say, I want to kill myself, or I want to kill other people. And that would be considered dangerous behaviors, how they rank this stuff when it comes to abnormal psychology. So again, that's why I kind of wanted to go down the road of saying like they almost rank this as like from worst, or from not as bad, or like bad to worse to the worst of all time. And it's not necessarily that way, it's just that there's just different degrees. Obviously, if you look at somebody you'd rather have somebody to deal with somebody that is deviant more than dangerous, mainly because of the violent factor. But again, all of these could qualify for abnormal behavior when psychologists look at it. One word that they talk about, or at least maybe in TV shows they talk about, is insanity. It's not the same as mental illness, and was originally designed to protect defendants who are not capable of differentiating between right or wrong. And so here's what happens. A lot of times criminals would plead insanity, meaning they're not mentally stable enough to know the difference between right or wrong. You guys grow up and your parents tell you you need to obey. This is right, this is wrong. You do not steal. A person that has this insanity mentality is, they look at it and says stealing is right, lying is correct, and telling the truth is wrong. It's almost like things get flipped. And so that's kind of why they would say it's insane. So when you say that someone's insane, it's literally the person, according to psychologists, you're not capable of differentiating between right and what is wrong. But again, it's not the same as a mental illness. So if you say that somebody has a mental illness and they're insane, it's not the exact same, at least according to psychologists, it's not the same. So, how do they diagnose all of these things? How do they diagnose psychological disorders? Well, one of the ways that they would diagnose it is using assessment. Assessment is just a fancy word for testing. What they would do is they would actually accumulate data about an individual through the use of clinical interviews, meaning they sit down with them and they talk with them and they try to figure out who they are. They actually give them tests. Some of these tests, the people, depending on their mental condition, might not even be able to complete the test. And the results of medical and neurological exams. Medical exam meaning like a doctor actually sits down and talks with you, and a neurological exam means, they put like the fancy probes on your head, and they do MRIs, they do CAT scans, and these different types of scans to see what's going on neurologically in your brain. And that's kind of how they would assess this stuff. Now, because mental conditions can impact emotional behavior, functioning assessment often includes information about a person's physical health. So they would ask the family, they would ask the person, like, hey, are you exercising? Are you not exercising? Do you smoke? Do you drink? Do you have suicidal thoughts? Do you have, do you like to exercise? Do you have violent fits of rage? Those type of things. And so when they assess this, it's a lot of data that they're kind of trying to filter through the different things and figure out what's going on. And they have to meet with these individuals. You have to do these case studies. You have to do this stuff, because you can't just, over the phone say, yeah, this is probably what you got. No, you got to be able to kind of see how the person acts. That could be part of that. Now, all of this goes down to, and this is important, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, also known as the DSM-5. Now, the reason why this is so important, it's because it is the APA's classification system of mental illnesses. So when a psychologist sits down with someone and figures out what's going on, they literally would use this book. It's a large book to figure out what's going on. And what this book does is it classifies psychological disorders by their major symptoms. So, what this allows is therapists to make a mental illness diagnosis and also acknowledge medical and environmental factors that contribute to the overall mental health of an individual. Let me kind of make sure you guys understand what I'm saying here. Let's say that I go to a psychologist and I sit down and I tell them that I'm having voices that I feel are telling me to do stuff that's harmful to other people in my head. The therapist would then sit down and listen to all of my symptoms, and then what they would do is they'd make a diagnosis, and then they would acknowledge that there could be medical factors. Maybe I have something like I had a concussion and it caused brain bleeding, and now as a result, my frontal lobe is all damaged. And environmental factors, maybe I was abused as a kid or something along those lines, and they would say that that contributes to the overall mental health of an individual. And so basically, what this is it's like a guidebook for psychologists to figure out and kind of try to be on the same page with other psychologists and diagnose what's going on as far as the mental illness goes. The manual includes the common symptoms, meaning like, okay, if you are, if you are somebody who is schizophrenic, you would have these common symptoms. The prevalence, meaning like how prevalent it is, how frequently it happens, and differential diagnosis, meaning how to distinguish a particular mental illness from those that are similar. Like, is somebody that is bipolar somebody that's similar to schizophrenic? How could those two kind of be confused? And the DSM lists diagnostic criteria for 22 major categories of mental disorders. And then it's subdivided into hundreds of disorders. So, what I'm going to have you guys do is we're not going to go through each and every one of these, mainly because it would take a very long time. But if you look at this neurodevelopment disorders, neurodevelopment would basically be dealing with your brain development, schizophrenia, spectrum, or other psychotic disorders, bipolar, depressive, anxiety disorders, obsessive compulsive, also known as OCD, trauma, stressor related, dissociative disorders, somatic symptoms. Those ones are kind of cool. We'll talk about those. I say cool, I guess they're just kind of interesting to learn about. Feeding and eating disorders, elimination disorders, sleep-wake sexual dysfunctions, gender dysphoria, disruptive. You guys can read through all of these, and if you notice on the asterisks, ones you have already covered or will in the next section. So almost all of these are ones that we will talk about or have in some way, shape, or form, and they would be in somewhat applicable to the AP exam if it did cover the section, but it does not. So, but we still want to talk about them and still make sure you guys have that. So in 2015, healthcare providers were required to use diagnosis code sets from the World Health Organization, the WHO, International Classification of Diseases and Related Health Problems, the ICD-10. So basically what it means is your healthcare provider, Blue Cross Blue Shield, whoever you guys have, HAP, they were required to use these code sets according to this DSM and according to the ICD-10. Number 8, both the DSM-5 and the ICD-10 help guide medical diagnosis and define who is eligible for coverage of medications, treatments, and special services. So therefore, if you were schizophrenic, then they would say, okay, these are the type of medicines that we would use, the type of treatments, and if you need special services, this is how we would go about helping you. And it's kind of like a guidebook. As I said, the DSM is a guidebook. It helps psychologists get on the same page as far as what they're trying to accomplish. Okay? All right. Like I said, this is it's a long section. There's 23, I think, pages here, so we'll be on this for a while. We'll have some other things that we'll be doing in the meantime, but hopefully this will be interesting to you guys. If you have any questions, contact me.